then sell it to patients, but they would have to sign some sort of acknowledgement form that that material hadn't been sent to a safety compliance center and tested. So that is an option now for caregivers to continue providing product, and that is up until, I believe, December 31st.
Correct. Yeah. So exciting news there. But let's get right into our topic today and talk about municipalities. So I've personally already had been asked this question by a city that had medical marijuana licensing. A lot of our municipalities have questions about, well, what do we do now with Proposal 1? And you will find that most municipalities are probably going to tend to want to be conservative, take their time so that they can make an informed decision about what makes sense for them for marijuana in the future. Unlike the Medical Marijuana Facilities Licensing Act, it was very clear that until municipalities actively did something, licenses were not allowed in that jurisdiction. The MMFLA effectively said, a city needs to opt in via an ordinance. That ordinance can limit, restrict, or prohibit the number of licensees, the types of licensees, and then could zone, the locations those licensees were allowed to be. Proposal 1, the Michigan Regulation and Taxation of Marijuana Act, or the MRTMA, does something similar but in a different way, and it's important to understand that distinction so that we can work with municipalities that want to do this, but municipalities are going to want to do this in an intelligent way. And we all have to acknowledge, especially those of us who might be on the side of, the more cities the better, as many ordinances we can get. If we truly want to implement that and have as many municipalities opt in and allow as many of these businesses as we can't just, assume that these cities are going to be comfortable and with us to the rate we want to be. We need to hear out what their concerns are. We need to address those concerns. We need them to make informed decisions, because the more opportunity municipalities have to do that, the much more likely it is that they're actually going to allow these facilities, allow these places to, prosper. So first, just as a summary, the MMFLA, my computer's doing funny things. The MMFLA basically allows a city to start with an ordinance. If you don't pass an ordinance, there are no medical marijuana facilities. Unlike that, the MRTMA, so many acronyms, the Prop 1 law, is silent as to what happens when a city doesn't opt in. Technically speaking, an operator could obtain a state license for an adult use business without some sort of ordinance from a community saying that they could. Now, realistically, that's very unlikely that would ever occur, but it needs to be acknowledged that my interpretation of law, and I think several of my colleagues' interpretation of the law, is saying technically you're not opted out. There are ways, in theory, legal theory, that you could obtain a state operating license for an adult use business without the municipality saying yes, no, or anything, just remaining silent. And that doesn't have to be a bad thing, but it needs to be something that everyone understands so that they can make the appropriate decisions under it. There are parts of Proposal 1's law that are going to be left to interpretation. Interpretation we don't have yet. It's almost certainly going to have to be interpretation by courts at some point. And we want to make sure that we are working with the communities that these businesses are seeking to be in, so that those conversations can be amicable. Because at the end of the day, you need to work with your municipality. No matter what kind of license you have, you are a constituent of that community when you operate there. And you're going to need their approvals, you're going to need their support along the way as you not only obtain your license for the first time, but then maintain your license. So I think, what I'd like to do is maybe talk about a little bit about what Proposal 1's saying, and then we'll talk about what municipalities are kind of doing in reaction to that. So do you know, I guess just to get started, I feel like I'm talking a lot.
That's all right.
I'm very good at talking a lot, so. So basically Proposal 1, says a couple things. What are some of those things?
Proposal 1 effectively says that a municipality can either choose to opt out, and methods for going ahead and opting out are what we're seeing right now. It's looking like police power ordinances, where they're saying that it's a violation, or it's an ordinance implemented to protect the general welfare of the people, or we're seeing zoning ordinances where they're saying that we're not going to have any zoning available for adult use marijuana. So it does allow for a municipality to actively opt out. It also allows for a municipality to actively opt in, and it allows a municipality to remain passive, and then gives the people the opportunity to either submit an application directly to the municipality, or it allows the people to file a petition for reconsideration if the municipality opts out and the people don't like that decision.
Mm-hmm. So effectively, part of the problem municipalities are going to have to face is they have a lot of options. There's not really a you have to do this ultimatum. They have flexibility in the way they implement either marijuana program. And with that flexibility means there's not really, an easy path. Like you have to think about how marijuana is going to impact your community. You have to make decisions that might be easier to have been made if the state just told you had to do it. So respecting that, under the adult use law, a municipality can limit and prohibit marijuana establishments. They don't have to, but there are some constraints on what they can and can't do that did not exist under the medical version of these licensing laws. For example, Proposal 1's MRTMA says you cannot prohibit the co-location of marijuana licensing with medical marijuana licensing. It's unclear where those lines are going to be drawn in the sand because, at one point of the law it says, in general, a municipality can limit or prohibit marijuana establishments. On the other hand, it says if there is a marijuana establishment, you can't exactly say what can and cannot be done there. There are some constraints on what you can co-locate. So, for example, and it's a concern that needs to be addressed, if you have a medical marijuana license from your community or a permit to engage with the state licensing project, that is a marijuana establishment under the MRTMA. So what a community has every right to consider carefully is if they are allowing a medical marijuana establishment and they remain silent as to adult use licensing, in theory that applicant is eligible to seek a state license. Nothing says that they can't otherwise. Now, I believe if a municipality had a clear ordinance that said they are not allowed to do that, then the state would not allow that operator to be there. But in silence, the municipality, might have no ability to stop that applicant from seeking both licenses, one for the medical license that they had to get municipal approval for, and an adult use license located at the same facility that the municipality was silent on. But it's the silence that makes that possibility. And it is when they are not silent, when there is some sort of ordinance restricting it, that we have some questions that are going to be difficult to answer. If we have a community that's allowed a medical marijuana establishment and a community that is trying to prevent adult use establishments, then there's going to be some questions on how these two laws work together that we can give opinions on, but are really going to ultimately be interpreted by the court system at some point. And we need to all appreciate that because nobody wants to have to settle a dispute in court. We don't have to. What would be much more useful for long-term success from pretty much every stakeholder in this industry is to work with these municipalities so that we can get to an amicable solution. And part of that process is going to have to start with these municipalities taking breathing room and the time they need to make educated decisions. So just, from that purpose alone, when you hear about a municipality opting out of Proposal 1 or opting out of the MRTMA, that doesn't mean that they are never going to allow businesses there. That doesn't mean that community is shut off. What it means in most cases, and in the cases I've seen, is that community has concerns. Maybe those concerns are misplaced, maybe those concerns aren't understood, maybe they're very well understood, but that community has concerns. And taking that step gives them a level of comfort so that they can make an educated decision about what is appropriate in the long term, not a rash decision about what they think they have to do. I don't necessarily think that they need to do that quickly. Licensing is going to be a pretty known quantity about when those opportunities exist for adult use businesses. I think that most municipalities are going to have several months while the Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs gets up to speed on what our rules or regulations are going to be, what the process is going to look like. So a municipality paying attention to the issue is going to have a lot of opportunity to know, okay, if we're not ready yet and we kind of see what that's looking like, maybe we can do something to buy ourselves some time. So some of the first municipalities, especially the ones that did so, days after November 6th, they were probably making rash decisions, but,
That being said, though, it buys them some time. The language of the Act doesn't give a lot of guidance to municipalities on when they have to make a decision or when they have to start accepting applications. And so municipalities, without having some really clear, definitive guidance from the state, they are going to respond the way that, frankly, I think a lot of us expected them to respond, and that's buy ourselves some more time, you know, take some time and talk to people in the industry, talk to the constituents, see what they need, and then we can create a very well-informed and well-thought-out ordinance if we decide to do this. So that being said, if a municipality opts out, they can always opt back in. They can always, you know, revoke that ordinance and decide to put forth something that has more guidance as to their application expectations, their zoning requirements, and that sort of thing. And then, again, we can always come back to the people can file an intent to file a petition. So you have to file something with the municipality showing that you intend to get a petition of signatures, and it has to be 5% of the voters that voted for the ordinance in the first place, or
the gubernatorial election.
Yes, the gubernatorial election. Thank you. No problem. So 5% of the voters have to sign this petition, and then you file it, and then you might be able to get this ordinance through without having the city council or municipal officials taking an active stance into adopting their own ordinance.
Right. And let's think about, like, just because you can engage in a what I call a ballot proposal action does not mean that's in your best interest. Right. What that is a last case, you know, worst case scenario, because for what needs to be understood by anyone who wants to be, whether a micro business or a large operator or anything in between, is getting a license is incredibly important, but you're going to have to maintain that license as you move forward. You're going to be effectively citizen of that jurisdiction. You're going to be working with this municipality all along the way, and they have a seat at the table should you do something that's not in the best interest of the city, in their opinion, to make obtaining and maintaining your application difficult in your future. Not only that, but a municipality has the ability to limit your ability to expand into additional licensing or expand your building to accommodate growth. So you want to build a strong relationship with that community that you're going to operate in. And if you are the banner, the flag raiser of putting a ballot proposal together and doing a workaround of your township board of trustees or your city council or your village council, then, you know, politically, you're not going to be in their favor if they disagree with you and you've entered it into a pretty adversarial position. So if your community is just out of touch and doesn't want to allow this, and the vast majority of their constituents do, you know, there's two things that can happen. One, you elect officials that are more in line with the desire of their electorate, or two, you can engage in a ballot proposal. Both have their place. Both are going to be incredibly important in the future. And municipalities should be aware that 5% of the gubernatorial populace is a lower threshold than other types of ballot proposals that your constituents can engage in. So nobody wants to be in that position. The people who want these businesses that feel like they need to do this don't want to have to do that. It's time-consuming and expensive. The municipalities are going to have to live with potentially a proposal that the people whose job it is to create that type of language, didn't have a hand in writing. So they are not always going to be in a position to want that, and it's just going to make everyone not want to work with each other. So before we get to that point, you know, understand that just because your community is opting out doesn't mean that's a bad thing. It just means that's not going to be a community that you can file applications for the next day. And especially in the context of adult use marijuana, something I think everyone, whether you're a proposed applicant or a municipality, needs to understand is the way our state is implementing adult use licensing opportunity is, effectively speaking, you need to hold a medical marijuana license under the MMFLA. If you don't have one of those licenses, with the exception of the Michigan residency smaller licenses that are effectively new, the micro businesses and the 100 plant count grows, the rest of the remaining adult use licenses are pretty much a one-to-one to the medical ones. So if I'm a large medical marijuana grow, and I've already obtained the approval of a municipality, understanding what that license does is important. I'm growing marijuana in a building, right? If that, from the business owner's perspective, you know, I'm growing medical marijuana plants, and I would like to expand my, you know, potential use into also growing adult use plants, the practical impact on your community is pretty not there. It's what perspective does it change from a municipality's concern if some of those plants are in the medical system or the adult use system? The operator itself for the next 3 years, the 1 year it takes to implement and the 2 years from that point, needs to have medical marijuana operator approval. They have to pass a pre-qualification from the state of Michigan to be a large grow. So if that building, which is a grow, has medical marijuana plants growing in it and adult use plants growing in it, there really isn't a change of impact on your community that's practical, right? There might be some moral stance. Some communities don't want to allow adult use, but they're comfortable with medical. But brass tacks, the grower is a grower. One license lets them grow medical plants, one license lets them grow adult use plants. All the concerns about what that grower is doing really don't change given the context of medical or adult use. What does concern municipalities, I think, most significantly is point of sale, dispensaries. And what municipalities, I think, are truly worried about is if I've allowed a medical marijuana grow, there is language in this law that concerns me that thinks maybe now I have to live with an adult use dispensary there. And we cannot acknowledge the fact that that language is open to that interpretation. If the Medical Marijuana Act, the adult use law says a municipality or the state cannot prevent the co-location of an adult use license with a medical marijuana license holder, then it doesn't take someone who is concerned about that to put two and two together. I hold a medical marijuana grow license, and there's part of this law that implies I can't be prevented from putting an adult use dispensary license there. And whether we all want that or not, we need to work with our municipalities so that they can understand that and do something about it. Because we don't want to be the sneaky applicant who pulls a fast one on our municipality and gets that license. Yes, you might get it, but now that municipality is never going to be on your side because you worked around them. That is not necessarily in your financial best interest or your ability to expand that use as you are successfully operating that business, because you're not having the municipality help you along the way, which all other applicants who take a more reasonable approach are going to have. So if a community is concerned, and before we have courts explaining to us where these lines are drawn in the sand, I personally can't be too, I'm not as much of an advocate as I am. I want to see every city opt in and allow every license, because I think that a lot of this concern is coming from people who just need to educate themselves on what we're trying to do in Michigan here. But it's not my place to change their minds. They need to make their minds for them. You need to understand that a city taking the time, opting out of Proposal 1, to educate themselves and make an informed decision is, in the long term, going to allow the businesses that ultimately get to exist there to be more successful in most cases.
I would agree. And I think that it's also important to understand and appreciate the amount of time that municipalities take to come up with an ordinance that they think is going to be best for their constituents. I am always sometimes frustrated, but usually impressed by the level of thought that goes into the specific verbiage of an ordinance. And so to understand the flip side as well, not to be upset with our municipal officials, but to support them and to understand their side of it as well. And the fact that this doesn't happen overnight is key. I think that going off of Travis's comment about not forcing the education on somebody, but to provide those resources to people is integral to flipping some of these municipalities. So even if a municipality is talking about opting out or has already opted out, it certainly doesn't hurt to attend the city council meetings or the board meetings. It doesn't hurt to maintain ongoing conversations with your municipal officials about the industry and how this might be the right time now for the municipality to consider this. It doesn't hurt to always do community outreach and engagement. I'm always pushing some sort of community outreach with my clients, because if you can build a tie, multiple ties within the community and get community leaders to support you and your business, that's going to make it easier for you moving forward with municipal officials. It doesn't hurt to have coffee hours or host informational gatherings at the public library about this industry and how it can be a benefit to the local community. There's jobs, there's going to be tax revenue generated, there's going to be economic growth all the way around. And so to maintain those open lines of communication, I think, are really key. And so as long as we're being a voice for the industry and providing resources actively, I think that's going to be just paramount in helping these municipalities make their decisions, come back, revisit the issue, draft the ordinance that we would like to see, and then move forward from there.
Definitely. And I think, like, I say this I used to say this all the time, and I continue to say it in the context of the medical marijuana projects, but, as excited as I assume most of the people who would listen to us are about this industry, you need to appreciate, even when it's hard to do so, that these municipalities have a whole plethora of concerns that have nothing to do with cannabis. And even if they are cannabis supporters in these council positions, they are potentially open to the idea of cannabis licensing. That doesn't mean, from their perspective, representing their community, that it's time to make that decision, or it's time to make a quick decision. We hope that they make informed decisions and decisions that create opportunity for Michigan. But a municipality has a lot of things they need to worry about. And respecting that and understanding that is going to lead us to success when we work with these communities. What I'd like to do is, maybe to conclude our video, just kind of summarize a few things I'd like municipalities to consider. And I know Nick asked some questions, and we'll kind of touch on that here in a second. But Proposal 1 passed by a significant margin. It was for 10-point swing. It wasn't quite as successful as Proposals 2 and 3, but it was a controversial issue. We had a lot of people abstain from that vote, but it passed by more than 10 points. And if you're a community where your constituents voted for Proposal 1, especially in a significant number, we need to remember one thing. We were talking about recreational marijuana. I don't have any data to support this, but I think it's pretty well accepted that there's very few people who support adult use marijuana that don't support medical marijuana. And we know there's people who support medical marijuana that don't support adult use marijuana. So if you're in a community that has supported Proposal 1, and you are on the fence about allowing medical marijuana licensing in your community, I'd like to understand why you're taking that position. Because the more businesses you allow to engage in the medical marijuana program will allow these businesses to exist for our patients. And as most of the patients watching us know, we have a significant shortage of service and products for you as we've transitioned out of our old laws to our new. And municipalities, whatever decision you want to make about Proposal 1, don't let that discourage you from making an intelligent decision about medical marijuana. Beyond that, we also need to acknowledge that the state of Michigan, being the first state in the Midwest to support adult use marijuana, is a huge financial boon for our state. People want to invest in these businesses both in our state and from abroad. And if we had waited, like Ohio had done a few years ago, for one of the other Midwest states to beat us to the punch, like now Illinois and Ohio are both significantly considering allowing recreational marijuana, if that had happened before Michigan had this opportunity, the people who want to funnel investment and develop businesses in Michigan would have been going to these other states first. That would have lost overall financial opportunity for our state. The same thing happens now when we're looking at the state of Michigan. The communities that are brave enough to take the time, educate themselves, and pass ordinances that enable adult use licensing, even if you're uncomfortable with the point of sale dispensary licenses, but allowing people to have the opportunity to seek these licenses, especially if your municipality can do so, timely before some of your neighbors and other communities eventually do this throughout the years, is going to drive that economic interest to your community. No one's trying to hold you hostage by saying, we'll give you all this money, but you have to acknowledge the reality of that the cannabis industry is one of the fastest growing industries in the country, and the eye is on Michigan right now to build businesses, in a way that isn't going to be there forever. And you've seen it when medical marijuana licensing turned out in Michigan, you'll see it again. Those communities that take the time and do this in an intelligent way can accomplish two goals. They can service the desire of their constituents, and they can drive that economic interest to their communities. And some of the communities, I know I'm from one, could certainly use that economic investment.
Absolutely.
So that doesn't mean you need to make a rash decision, but you should take the time to think about marijuana differently. Because our state overwhelmingly decided we wanted adult use marijuana. That may or may not be right for your community, but it's right for our state according to the people who vote, not our legislature, no one else, the voters of this state. And that will continue to be the case. If you're just a consumer, if you're just an interested party, no city can tell you you can't consume or cultivate marijuana as an individual. What communities get to do is decide what the right path is for commercial businesses. And they do that for all commercial industries in some way, shape, or form. It's just because of our compromise we've made for both medical marijuana and now adult use marijuana, municipalities have a lot more power over the flow of where these businesses get to be. And the ones who do that in an intelligent way and enable operators to be members of their communities are going to see the ripple effect of those communities growing, as those businesses grow within them. So certainly don't make a rash decision one way or the other, because if your concern is over some of these, the language items of Proposal 1, there's a lot of things we don't know, and we're going to continue to learn over the next few months. But, that cuts both ways. If you make a rash decision and drive the people interested in your community to those places next to your community or outside of your community, you might lose out on opportunity that those communities are brave enough to take. And if you're an applicant that's trying to do this, if one of your municipalities takes a slow approach, the same thing's happening. You need to understand that that community's desires and concerns and goals are different from yours, and you need to work together. So I feel like I've talked a lot this episode. Sorry.
You have. It's all right.
Yeah.
I'm used to it.
Can't help me. So
I know that we had a couple of questions, and I know that our colleague Nick Galindez has been trying to answer some of them. Travis, has there been any that haven't been answered?
Well, Nick asked about the discrepancy between Proposal 1 election results and cities opting out. I think, unless I mischaracterized that, Nick, I think that was kind of what I was trying to touch on with the how the election vote was versus decisions made. I think if your community, the constituents of your community pass Proposal 1 overwhelmingly and your community opts out, I wouldn't necessarily read that as a sign of that city, sticking it to the electorate. I think us as advocates, us as people who might want to seek licenses, or us as people who just want these licenses to open up around them, need to understand that that could be in the fastest path to enabling licenses. So don't be scared or concerned about an opt-out, but hold that city accountable. Make them explain what their decisions are, and make sure that if you want these businesses and they have opted out, that they are encouraged to take the time to educate themselves. Because should you identify a municipality who did blatantly opt out for an unintelligent reason, we do have the ballot proposal as a way to remedy that situation. And even if we don't want to, it's going to be an appropriate tool to use in some situations. I just want people who might be considering taking that approach to appreciate what you're giving up if that's the approach to take. Because you do not necessarily win you any friends or allies within your municipality if you kind of force an ordinance down their throat. And you might not be stuck with an ordinance that's as well designed for the community as a whole if it's written by the people that community hasn't elected to do that work. So you want your municipality's support not only as a cannabis operator, but just as someone who's going to be running a business in that community. Or maybe a resident of that community. And if you are an advocate of cannabis, understand that this is a brand new thing for these municipalities and our state, and having the desire to take the time to do it might not be what any of us want as people who primarily deal with the people who are trying to get licenses. But in the short term, that's going to be frustrating. But don't let that discourage you, because sometimes that's what needs to happen for that conversation to develop the way it needs to ultimately get your goal of opportunity to do this.
Absolutely. So I think that the bottom line here is to act as a resource for these municipalities. And secondly, if at the end of the day the municipal officials are not willing to engage with you, you do have options. Look at the law, contact an attorney, talk to the municipal officials, talk to the people, and at the end of the day, the people are the ones that voted for Prop 1. And the people are the ones that are going to be able to put a ballot initiative back on to get the municipality to have some sort of ordinance. So there are options, but there's going to be a lot to figure out between now and then. And so it'll be a fun ride moving forward, I think.
It will. And like I said, I don't see, when I hear about a municipality opting out, I don't even read that as necessarily a bad thing. What my first gut instinct is that community is identifying that it needs to have some breathing room to think about this. That's honestly my first thought. A better thought would be, great, another community opted in. That's what I want to hear. But short of that, it's at least showing to me that that community is thinking about marijuana. And sometimes that's the hardest part, because I can't tell you how many municipalities I had to go into when we were working on the medical side of this, and we tried to talk to them about medical marijuana, and so that they could start making a decision about whether medical marijuana licensing was right for them, and they didn't even want to have a conversation about marijuana. Sometimes an opt-out is just them not wanting to have a conversation about marijuana, but you force them to have at least one conversation about marijuana, and it's might be the foot in the door you need to push this forward. And not all municipalities are going to do this in the most efficient way, or maybe in the most intelligent way. And you can't blame them, because there is no right way to do this. They need to kind of charge forward and design the best path. And when we look at medical marijuana licensing, we at least kind of can get some idea of how this went before.
Right.
You know, it took a while for the first municipality to bravely put an ordinance together. And then there were 2 or 3 for a while, and eventually the municipalities that were ready to do this kind of got to work together to figure out what the ordinances now start to look like. And they kind of have standardized, even though they haven't needed to. You know, I expect something similar to happen for Proposal 1. And they have the benefit of building off of their ordinance work some of these communities have been doing in the medical context. So,
absolutely.
And if you're a consumer or fan of cannabis, they can't stop you from consuming it. They can't stop you from cultivating it. So, you know, if you don't have access to marijuana because your community is not allowing marijuana businesses and the surrounding communities are not allowing marijuana businesses, there's nothing they can do to prevent you from doing a home cultivation. So,
of up to 12 plants per household.
Now, make sure you follow the rules. Yeah. But, you know, so municipalities, you know, if you want people to have access to marijuana in a safe way, quote unquote, even if you have no desire to consume cannabis yourself, you know, there's a reason we have licenses for business, and we're going to have responsibilities those license holders need to, you know, live up to. So, you know, I encourage you to make an informed, intelligent decision, municipalities, as you're considering what's best for you. And also appreciate that even if an applicant could obtain a license through your silence, does not mean that that is an intelligent thing for that applicant to do. You know, if somebody asked me if they had that opportunity, hey, we're going to seek a state license because the municipality is silent, that doesn't mean that's the goal. Like, you know, that great. Just getting the license doesn't mean you're going to be able to successfully do something with it. So.
Right, absolutely. Well, if you have any other questions moving forward, please feel free to comment on our videos. We'll be happy to answer questions as they come in. And as always, feel free to like, share, follow us on Instagram and Facebook, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Great. Thanks, guys.